At age 12, I started babysitting for family friends who had 3 daughters, ages 4 to 7. They lived in a cul-de-sac where nearly every home housed a young couple with children in elementary school. The neighbourhood was extremely close-knit, like the 1950s American block party communities. They had a communal policy on using one another's toys. Any kid could use a play structure in someone else's yard any time without asking. Shortly after I started working in the neighbourhood, they revised the rule to any time a family is not using a babysitter to watch their kids, to ensure I would not get overwhelmed supervising a swarm of kids I wasn't paid to watch. It was thus more or less known when parents were going out and leaving someone else in charge of their children. I was welcome to take the girls to play in any other yard as they wanted. Their parents even gave me permission to let them play in someone else's yard or sandbox independently if I needed a short break. Being an avid Babysitters Club reader, I didn't leave the girls outside unsupervised ever. I would wait until someone else wanted a water or bathroom break and then corral everyone inside temporarily. Similarly, when the girls wanted to play in the treehouse owned by an older couple a few doors up the street, I climbed up, despite a slight fear of heights, and crouched in the little house with them, despite feelings of claustrophobia, to follow my own rule. I don't recall whether my everyone inside, everyone outside together rule preceded the first odd interaction I had with the immediate next door neighbour or not. But when the police questioned the girls I babysat years later, they said nothing bad ever happened when I watched them, because I set up that weird, sometimes annoying rule. One day, while playing basketball with the girls in the driveway, the next door neighbour came outside in a baseball cap and sunglasses and sat down on his second-story deck to read a paperback. I later noticed he'd turned his chair around 180 degrees to face us and the basketball hoop. I couldn't tell if he was looking at us. He had no reaction to me staring at him, flipping pages in the book like someone would when reading. This behaviour repeated every time we played basketball for the 5 years I watched the girls. Eventually, once I noticed him in the chair, accessories on, I would suggest a game we could play inside or in the front yard, but out of view. The strange neighbour was familiar to me as he went to my church. I have never seen someone kneel in a pew, head bowed and hands folded, with the same level of intensity before or since. Once, when my family was seated behind him, the priest came over to ask me to lead the children's mass during the homily, because the usual person was out sick. This guy turned around and glared at me like I personally set out to interrupt his prayer time. When I worked in the church nursery during various masses, I would often make eye contact with him as he waited in line, outside the nursery door, to use the restroom. From what I gleaned from our family friends and other people in the neighbourhood, the odd basketball observer was a nice guy who gave up his apartment and job in the city to move in with and care for his sick, elderly mother. Since everyone thought he was great, and since he went to church, this was before the Catholic sex scandal broke, I figured I was in the wrong for finding him creepy. Even as young as 12, I was used to guys in their 40s and 50s asking me to go somewhere with them, or driving by slowly as I walked, biked, jogged, to make lewd comments. I figured I was projecting those experiences onto this awkward, quiet guy who was not doing anything wrong. For instance, I was certain that if the guy next door was a creep, he would not miss the opportunity to watch with his sunglasses on and book in hand while the kids and I went swimming each summer when the family opened their above-ground pool. But he never set foot out on his deck when the kids and I donned swimsuits to play in the pool or backyard. I was more convinced I was conceited and mean. Then, when I was 15 or 16, I caught him looking in the window as I cleaned up after movie night. The girls and I put on a film after bath time, and instead of watching it theatre style in total darkness, we kept some lights on so I could braid the girls' hair. The big screen TV we used for movies was located in an addition on the house with floor-to-ceiling windows. Though my parents were OCD about shutting blinds and curtains when the sun went down to prevent people from seeing in, our family friends had no window treatments on the big modern windows. When I turned off the last light in the room, a floor lamp right next to a window facing the neighbour's house. I could see into the darkness outside, where the weird man sat on his deck in a chair in line with the window I was looking through. I looked over my shoulder and realised he had line of sight on where the girls and I sat on the floor during the movie. As I looked back towards the house, I glimpsed him hustling inside. I would have doubted I'd seen him at all if he had not left the chair in an unusual spot. After watching him turn the chair around to read during many a basketball match, I knew where the chair sat that night, facing the window into the family room, was not the chair's usual position on the deck. After that incident, I would suggest playing board games in another room or insist on watching movies theatre style to ensure he could not peep on what we did at night. Once the girls were asleep, I avoided the family room entirely because I was paranoid about being watched. If I wasn't in the kitchen doing homework or reading, away from all windows, I'd walk around the original first floor footprint of the house, where all the windows had curtains. The first time the parents noticed my change in routine, they insisted I could watch TV or movies in the family room. I didn't mention anything to them because I was worried my concerns were silly and conceited. When I was 17, my family heard an evening cable news story about a man in our town caught in a police sting operation, in which a woman pretended to prostitute her 2-year-old. When they raided his house, the police found a ton of child pornography on his computer. Our family friends called a couple weeks later. They wanted to know how I knew the young man next door to them was not safe. He was the guy I'd heard about on TV. As they described it, the police found his blog where he wrote about his obsession with one of the girls who lived next door to him. It detailed his fantasies involving her and his plans to act on them. Things like lying in the treehouse for hours hoping to corner her when she climbed up alone to play. Many of his entries focused on taking advantage of or kidnapping the girl while the babysitter was in charge. In his head, babysitters were like the ones in old movies, talking to friends on the phone or making out with a boy they invited over instead of caring for the children. As it became clear I did neither one of those things, his plans evolved to killing the babysitter, taking the girl, and getting out of Dodge. After talking to the girls to ensure they were not victims, the police suggested I might know something to have acted the way I did. All the pieces, the frequent run-ins at the church when I had children in my care, or the weird things he did when he knew I was watching the kids next door, all fit together cohesively. I was relieved I was not mean-spirited or imagining things. I was perhaps conceited. The focus was not on me, but on the children. But I was not crazy. I recognize I was not the person most at risk in this situation, and yet, suburb pedo and would-be murderer, let's not meet again.
In my 8th grade year, I moved in with a family member after my mother passed away, and this family member lived pretty far into the country. Because of this, I had to ride the school bus to my new school. I used to live in town before the move, so this was my first time on a bus, besides school field trips. But then, there were other adults present. In the morning, there were only about 6 or 7 students on the bus, and I was the first person to be picked up and the last one to be dropped off after school. For the first few weeks of school, everything seemed fine. The students were quiet. Everyone kept to themselves, headphones in and whatnot. Being the first to get on, I always headed straight to the back of the bus to avoid everyone. Not that I had an issue with anyone, I was just socially awkward, and the more people I could avoid talking to, the better. As for my bus driver, we will call him Tom, he seemed like a normal bus driver. He didn't say a word to anyone and just did his job. He began getting a little friendlier to me when he dropped me off since I was the last one to get off, but it was never anything strange. It was a smile and a "see you in the morning" or "have a nice night." Nothing I would ever suspect. Things continued like this for a while, nothing exciting happening until me, being a 15-year-old girl who had just lost her mother, decided to throw a giant tantrum and beg that I no longer wanted to live with this family member. I missed the more populated city, my old friends, and my old school. So, about 2 months into going to this school, I decided to move back home with another family member. This is where the story shifts. On the last week of my bus rides, I told Tom I would no longer be taking his bus anymore as I was homesick and moving back home. He asked me to sit up towards the front of the bus for the rest of that week so he could say goodbye better. I didn't think anything of it. He was a 40 to 50-year-old man who had never gave me any red flags. Anyways, I listened and moved to the seat right behind him so he could look at me through the large mirror above him and we could chat. It all seemed so innocent at first. He asked about my mother, why I was leaving, what I wanted to do when I grew up, blah, blah, blah. The last few days of riding the bus, the questions got stranger, and I may have not have been able to see the signs of a creep, but I knew the questions weren't things a middle-aged man should be asking a teenage girl. If anything, I thought he was just being nosy. He asked me if I had a boyfriend, if I had had my first kiss yet, and what an ideal date for me would be. I answered honestly, but with a weird feeling in my stomach. Gut feelings are 500% real. On my final day riding the bus, as I got on, Tom asked me if I would sit in the front again, but wait until everyone else was off the bus. I agreed, going back to my past seat in the back of the bus, and waited until everyone got off. I moved to the seat behind him again, but this time he didn't say anything to me, at first. I probably should have mentioned earlier, but from the last stop before me and my stop, there was about a 25 to 30-minute driving distance. I'd say he didn't say a word to me for about 20 minutes of that time. I sat listening to my music until he pulled the bus over. We were on my road, and I knew my family member's house was close ahead, yet he pulled over and stopped the bus. If I could explain to you the fear that ignited in me when the bus came to a halt and Tom turned in his chair so he was facing me with a smile on his face, I would. I had seen one too many movies with creepy men doing things they shouldn't be doing to teenage girls and expected the worst. I was expecting to be assaulted, harmed, kidnapped, or maybe even killed, but it never came to that. Instead, Tom told me to take my phone out and add his number to it. He said he would be here if I needed to talk about my mother, telling me the story of his own mother and things I can't really remember. I just remember it being an innocent conversation, no matter how weird you might think it is for a bus driver to offer a teenager his number. He dropped me off after that, and we said our goodbyes. Years passed, and I was in 10th grade when I saw Tom again. I still had his number in my contacts, but I never contacted him, even when things got rough, because truly, what girl would call a strange bus driver when she needed help? Not me. And I was at Walmart with a few friends, and we decided to split up and get the things we individually needed. I headed off to get a box of Q-tips when I heard someone say my name. I could tell it was a male's voice, and I figured it would just be a male teacher I once had. It was Tom. But I couldn't tell at first. He had grown out his facial hair, and I honestly had just forgotten about him. But once he said hello to me, I remembered everything. I wasn't necessarily scared. I just found it odd that this man who was my bus driver for a few months remembered me after over 2 years. It was a simple conversation. He asked how I had been and how high school was going for me, and I answered, not really bothered to ask how he was. We said our goodbyes, and I met back up with my friends, explaining to them the whole story of Tom, to which they all found it scary that I never told anyone my bus driver gave me his number and asked me strange questions. I explained I thought he was just being friendly, because I truly did. I haven't seen Tom in person since then. Years have gone by. I'm in college, and I thought the story was over then. Just some overly friendly bus driver. It could have stayed innocent, right? About a month ago, I was talking to someone I went to school with at the other school, and I mentioned to her how scared I was thinking about the bus out there because of Tom. She was shocked I had mentioned him and asked for the full story. I told her a summary of it, the questions, the stopping the bus to give me his number, the encounter at Walmart. I told her he just gave me the creeps, and I hoped I would never see him again. This is when I found out Tom had been arrested for sexually assaulting 2 minors. She not only showed me his mugshot, but told me what had happened. My story nearly lined up perfectly with these two other children. Bus driver who asked personal questions, offers his phone number and comfort to children with trauma, and acted on it. The only difference was I got out of there. If I hadn't moved back to my hometown, I still wonder what could have happened to me. I'm extremely lucky that I never contacted his number, and I feel sorry for the two kids that did contact him, feeling they could trust this man. I know you're in jail, Tom, and are not getting out for a while, but please, let's not meet again.